Hello and welcome back. We've got a great example here. We're going to be creating some light rays in a photograph and using luminosity blending to really get them to seem realistic and to blend in with the photo. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop here. We're in our sample images, chapter 3, section 3, lightrays.jpg. Let's go ahead and open this image up. And first, we're just going to talk a little bit about images that are like good for adding light rays. For the most part, you want your image to be backlit. And what I mean by backlit is like your camera is going to be facing the light. So your subject is backlit, in other words. So this is our subject here, and you can see the light is coming from behind our subject. That's what creates this light right around our subject. It's also known as like a rim light, okay? So we're looking into the light, so the light is shining into the camera. Now, if the camera was on the other side of our subject and all the light was hitting the front of our subject, it doesn't make any sense to add light rays because you wouldn't be able to see them. So when you add light rays to a photo, you want to make sure that the image is backlit, preferably. And then you also want to, if possible, you want to make sure that you can actually see a light source in the image. And in this case, we can see here, this area here and right up here, this is where the light is actually going to be coming from. So you want a, starting place for your light rays. Okay, and if you do those two things, then your light rays will look good. Just follow what I'm about to do. So let's go ahead and get our start. Now, we have a really cool method actually for getting the light rays to start, and we're going to use channels to do so. So let's start off with our channels. We're going to take a look at our red channel, our green channel, and our blue channel. Now I'm looking for the greatest amount of contrast between light and dark here, okay, for these areas here. Now I'm gonna crop this image in just a little bit, like from the top, because I don't want light rays necessarily coming from there. We're just gonna have them come in from there. So this is the main area here that I'm looking for the contrast, and green actually looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and duplicate our green channel. We're going to hit Control or Command L for our levels. Just make our lights a little bit lighter, and then we'll make our darks a little bit darker. There we go. And something like that is starting to look pretty good. Okay, so let's hit OK there. And you can see, basically, I just want to make a selection of the light. So let's go ahead and hit Control or Command and click on the thumbnail. Perfect. So you can see that the lights get selected, right? In this case, it's going to be the light. And you can do this in a few different ways. You can use solid color fill layers. You can just paint. You can use curves. We're going to use layer masks in this case. So I'll just show you a couple different ways of creating the light rays themselves. And then from there, you can just transfer that layer mask from different types of layers. It's actually really cool. So let's just choose like a white solid color fill layer. So we'll go to our adjustment layer, down to solid color. I'm going to go all the way to white and hit OK. So remember, anytime you have a selection, it automatically loads that selection into the layer mask. So we had a selection of these light areas here. Let's hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. And now we can see, in fact, this is what our layer mask looks like. Now I'm going to take my brush tool. We're going to paint black. So hit B for the brush tool. And then we're going to paint black just right over top of that. We already mentioned we're going to kind of crop that out. And then right over here as well. We don't necessarily need light coming from the floor, right? Okay, I'll go ahead and leave these other areas there, but that's basically where the light is going to come through. So let's hold Alt or Option and then click on there as well. Now, if I use my Move tool, you can't really tell I did anything, but if I use my Move tool, I can move this around and you can see that's what we have, right? So it's the mask that's defining where this is going to be visible. Okay, let's go ahead and pop that in place. You can kind of tell if you turn it off and on, but really, if you move it, then you can really tell. So the next thing we want to do is basically use a filter to blur my layer mask and make it look like it's like light rays, for lack of a better word. So we'll go to Filter. We're going to go down to Blur, and we're going to go over to a Radial Blur. And here in our Radial Blur, we have two options. We can spin, okay, or we can go to Zoom. And Zoom is what we want. That's gonna make it look like we've got light rays. So we're gonna go all the way up to amount 100. Quality can be drafted, really doesn't matter that much here. We're gonna give it a little bit of blur after anyway. So quality's draft is just faster. And then you kind of want to choose your blur center. Unfortunately, this tool doesn't give you a preview of where it's going to be. So you're probably just going to have to put it somewhere and then try it and then see if it works. And if it doesn't, just do it again. So not a big deal. But we'll just try like right there for now. Okay, and hit OK. Okay, that's pretty good. You can see we have a nice blur. You can see it's starting to come in. I want it to be a little bit higher. So let's just hit undo. We'll just do the same thing again. So filter, blur, radial blur. Thankfully, all the settings stay in the same place. So we'll just go a little bit higher here and hit OK there. There we go. And that's starting to look pretty good there. Yeah, I think that looks nice. Let's just do a little bit lower. So filter, blur, and radial blur. There we go. Okay, cool. I think that looks pretty nice. And the cool thing about this, let's hold Alt or Option and look at our layer mask. The cool thing, check that out, because we are using the actual light information from the photograph itself, that's where, like, that's what's getting blurred. So the light rays really do look like they're coming from the, they really do look like they're coming from the light sources. I'm gonna hit undo. The quality draft honestly doesn't look that good. So let's just try it again. Let's go filter, blur, radial blur. Let's try the quality best. It made it a little bit too grainy. There we go. It's gonna take a little bit longer to kind of calculate this out, but it's gonna look better. There we go. You can see it looks much less grainy. Yeah, that looks way better. Maybe you can use the draft setting while you're figuring out where it goes because it's quick. And then when you got it figured out, that's good. Now, the next little tip here is that's one radial blur, right? But sometimes you want your light rays to be longer. You want more of a blur. So what you can do, super cool, is you can just go to filter and then you can go all the way down here to radial blur. You can do all that again. But within your filter menu, you have all the way up here at the top, you can see anytime you apply a filter in Photoshop, you can just apply the same filter again. You can just go right up here or hit Shift Command F. So I'm gonna hit Shift Command F. There we go. Or sorry, I think it's Control. There we go. I don't know how to read, apparently. The up arrow is a control. There we go. But you can also just click right here. Well, there we go. We're starting to look pretty good with our light rays, and we'll just do one more. So filter, radial blur again. And the thing that I like about this technique is that it uses the light sources from your image to make the to make the light rays themselves. I think that's just really cool. So let's hold Alt or Option, and we can see these are the light rays, right? How cool is that? Now, I want to do a little bit more just like right around our subject here. So let's go ahead and make that invisible. We're going to go back to our channels. Remember, we already kind of created this light area right around our subject, right? It's in our green channel. So let's hold Control or Command, select that again. Okay, layer, we're just going to create another solid color fill layer, just a white again. Now this time I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. And I'm just going to paint black everywhere around my subject and up here, because we already have this layer for all this up here. I just want like a little bit more light ray, like right around our subject basically. Okay, so we're just going to paint black around, you know, all this other stuff that's not the light of my subject. There we go, down there. And this will help the light rays look as though they're interacting with our subject just a little bit better. Okay, so we've got just the light around our subject now. So let's go to Filter, we're gonna go to Blur, and then Radial Blur. I want the blur center to be in the same place. We had the amount at 100 before. Let's just lower the amount just a little bit and see how that looks. Just want some of these light rays to kind of interact with our subject a little bit more. There we go. All right, well, that looks pretty cool. Let's see how that actually looks on our photograph. Okay, pretty cool. Maybe we'll just lower the opacity of that a little bit. There we go. We got a little bit more interaction with our subject. So I think that looks actually really nice. We've got our light flares in there and we're ready to go. So now that we have our light flares, we can actually combine these together. If I hold Control or Command and click on the layer mask, it tells me no pixels are more than 50% selected, but that's okay. Okay, so that selects this layer mask. And then check this out. If I look at this layer mask, I can just fill that with white. So I'm gonna hit Shift Delete. We're gonna fill that with white on this layer mask. And there we go. See, it's just the same area on that layer mask. So we just went from 2 down to 1. So now we just have one layer with our layer mask. And here we can start to do some luminosity blending. So we can do that right on this layer if we'd like. Or what I actually want to do is I want to kind of color the light of the whole image. Okay, and that's going to make this light and the light from the rest of the image kind of come together. It's going to make the light flares look a little bit more realistic too. So let's just grab a solid color fill layer. We're going to go to like a nice bright yellow. There we go. And then here on our layer mask, again, we can go with channels, apply image, blend if. In this case, I want to do apply image. So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut, which is Shift Option Command A. Okay. And I do want it to be merged. In other words, I want the color fill and the background to be visible, but because it's merged, it's also taking into account this layer. So there's two ways around that. One is you can just make this layer invisible, okay? And then do your apply image, which is a little bit less my preferred because I can't see what I'm doing. So my preferred method, if I am doing something like this, is to make first one apply image that's just merged of everything, okay? And then on this layer mask, I'll do another apply image, but instead of choosing merged, I'm gonna choose layer 1, okay? Because layer 1 contains information from my light rays as well as my background. So let's just choose layer 1. There we go. And here we can see, now we get a good idea of the light coming through this image. Okay, and we want it to be visible on the lights, so we don't click invert. That looks good. Let's hit OK. Let's try this one more. Okay, Shift Option Command A once more. Okay, and again, we're in multiply, so it's going to make it a little bit less visible. Okay, so there's the before and the after. Okay, so you can see what's nice about this is it colors the light from the light rays, but it also just colors the light from like the highlights in the rest of my image. Now we can change the blend mode. So we can change from normal down to overlay or soft light. There we go. You can see it has a little bit of a yellow effect. Or we can go back to normal and simply lower the opacity a little bit, which is I think what I want to do there. So I want that yellow to kind of come through a little bit more. There we go. So you can still see the yellow, like it's, it's definitely there. But it's subtle enough to where it doesn't really look like it's there. All right. And now we can turn this layer off, and this layer here, we can choose, you know what? I think this would just look a little bit better with like a little bit of a blur to it. So here's the light rays. We'll just go to filter. I mean, we already did a radial blur, but let's try a Gaussian blur. So filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. There we go, much less. Don't want to go too far or you're going to start losing all of your definition there, right? All right, well, I'm just going to use my up and down arrows on my keyboard to kind of fine tune this in. There we go. That looks good. Somewhere between 7 and 8, I think works really nicely. Okay, and that looks great. Now I got one more little tip for you, and we're gonna add a lens flare here in Photoshop. So here's my tip. We're gonna use apply image again. My favorite tool. All these tools are my favorite. I love Photoshop. We'll create a new layer. We're gonna go to image and down to apply image. We just want this to be merged, okay? Blending can be normal, and let's hit okay. So now we're going to use our lens flare, and we're going to have it center from about the same area that the light rays are coming from. So we'll go to filter, we'll go down to render and over to lens flare. Now, lens flare is one of those effects that you can't do on a blank layer. So that's why I have this apply image in there. So let's do lens flare. The nice thing is that you kind of get a nice preview of your image here. So let's just put it right about there. Okay. And hit OK. Yeah, maybe a little bit further down. So let's hit undo, filter, render, lens flare. Okay, just a little bit further down, and then we'll adjust our brightness, make it a little bit less bright. Okay, that looks cool. So the lens flare is nice. Here's the little trick. Right now it's baked onto that image, which I really don't prefer. What I would like the lens flare to do, I'd like to be able to move it if I want. So here's the trick. Just take the layer that you just put the lens flare on. You know, it's on an apply image layer. I'm gonna hit Shift Delete and just fill this entire thing with black. Okay, just filling the layer with black. So it's like, oh, we just undid our lens flare. But it's not a big deal. We just go to filter and then down to lens flare, we just apply the same one. Okay, so this is the same exact lens flare. And then I just want my blacks to disappear. So we just change our layer blend mode from normal down to screen, which makes the black disappear, all right? So now you have a lens flare that you can move. See, look at this. I can just move my lens flare if I want, which is pretty cool because you can't really do that normally. The nice things about that too is you can put a layer mask on there and like layer mask it, you know, if you want it to be like a little bit more subtle in some places. You can do that. You could put a blur. Again, you can move it around. You can do all kinds of fun things with it. And then this color, this red, is nice. I'd like to shift a little bit more towards yellow. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click on the layer itself. Okay. I just want to make a quick selection of that. So I'm going to hit Q for the quick selection and then paint right over here. Basically, a quick selection mode allows you to just paint where you want it to be a selection, and then you hit Q again and it becomes a selection. It's really nice. So Q again, and then that's selected. I wanted the inverse though, so I'm gonna hit Shift Command I. And then I'm gonna just hide this, Controller Command H, and then hit Controller Command U. So I just wanted to select that area. And look, now I can just change the color of that little area there. I wanted it just to go a little bit more towards yellow to kind of fit with what we're doing. There we go. Cool. And now we have that little lens flare in there that's basically the same color as our light rays. Isn't that nice? I think that's so nice. And you know what? I kind of want to put it behind that little grate there a little bit. So let's just make these layers invisible. We'll go to our channels, okay? Maybe, yeah, we'll go to our green channel. Let's hit Controller Command and click on the green channel. This green copy that we made. Now I'm going to inverse my selections. Shift Command I to inverse the selection. Okay, so now it's selecting black. We'll make those visible here. And then on this layer mask, let's hit Controller Command H to just hide this real quick. I'm going to just paint black on this layer mask real quick, like right there. Okay, so you can see I just painted the grate texture into this, right? Like this is the layer mask, right? Or sorry, this is the lens flare there. So I painted the grate right into there. And then I'm going to pop that lens flare right underneath the coloring, okay? That way the color from here colors there too. See when it's above, see how it's like yellow, 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 and then it's just like a little white dot? You can barely tell. I mean, it's a pretty similar, but you can see it's just a white dot there. But if I put this under my color layer, see, then it becomes colored by this also. So we still have our lens flare there, adding to the effect, but now it's being colored by the yellow layer. Okay, and I think that looks really, really nice. So let's just make those invisible and visible again. And look at that, we have a nice realistic lens flare that we can put on our image. And then, you know, if you want to maybe lower the opacity a little bit, make it a little bit more subtle, that's really easy to do. And then, you know, I would just hit C for the crop tool and crop out that top little part there, and then good to go. I'm not going to crop it right now, but that's basically the idea. Make it a little bit more visible. Make it more showy, like we actually did something here. Just follow these steps and then be sure that you can actually see the light source in your image. Notice how we use the light from the image itself to make the actual light rays. That's a super important part because if you don't see any light source, then there's nowhere for the light rays to actually come from. All right, well, that's it for this section. Now, if you haven't already done so, please leave a review of this tutorial right here on phlearn.com. It helps us out a ton, know what you thought of the tutorial, and it helps everyone else out there in the world know what you thought of the tutorial. So you're helping everyone involved. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next section. Bye, everyone.